How is it going, everybody? My name is DeMarco, and today we're taking another dive into Starfield. Today, talking about some gameplay features, some gameplay elements that I do hope get changed, tweaked, updated, modified before the release of Starfield in early 2023. Now, it is worth mentioning before we get into the video that these are pretty small changes, all things considered, things that wouldn't necessarily affect my overall opinion of the game or my verdict of the game after it launches. So it does raise the question, and it's a fair one: why talk about some of these to begin with? And there are really two reasons for it. The first is because I do think that attention to detail is incredibly important. Thoughts aside about The Last of Us Part 1 remake, you look at the visuals in that game, you look at the attention to detail, that the fact that the carpet moves beneath Joel's feet, it actually has physics as he's walking around, or that you can see perspiration coming from his mouth as he's speaking. That level, those small details, I do think add up, and ultimately what it does is creates this positive feedback loop where you might be willing to overlook certain features or other things because you are admittedly looking through, at a certain point, if you have a really good first impression of the game, some rose-colored glasses, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So presentation and first impressions absolutely do matter, but the second reason is I wanted to keep things lighter so that it's actually feasible, it's actually possible for Bethesda to work on some of these changes before Starfield's release. We don't necessarily know the nature of Starfield's delay, why it was pushed back into 2023, especially when Bethesda was so confident that they would be able to reach that 11/11 release date. So admittedly, I'm on the side of there must be some bigger things going on, some bigger tweaks that they may have to make. It's also possible that, yeah, it's 100% just polish. We'll never know. This first one is actually, it's been a complaint since Fallout 4, and even to a lesser extent Skyrim, and with the Creation Engine 2, it's supposed to be this massive engine overhaul that can do so much, and yet here there's a common issue that Bethesda hasn't seemingly found a resolution to, and that's being able to have multiple holstered weapons on your person at any given time. In fact, in one scene when the player character in the beginning of the gameplay demo pulls out the handgun, unless the holster really is that low on his thigh, it seemingly does come out of nowhere, so it just sort of spawns the same way it did in Fallout 4, which was a big complaint for a lot of players. But then later on in the gameplay demo, you see the player switch to the cutter, that mining laser weapon that you get in the game, and suddenly it just magically appears on his back. Then he transitions back to the handgun, and it suddenly disappears from being equipped on his person once again. Now, I don't see a reason why Bethesda can't find a resolution to this issue where your last equipped long weapon, that might be a rifle, a shotgun, the cutter, your last equipped large weapon can't stay on your back, and the handgun stays, your last equipped handgun stays on the side. Of course, Bethesda games are titles like Fallout 4, you might be carrying 5 different weapons, so I don't expect every single one to be on the player at every given moment, but it would be a more immersive way to display the equipment that you're carrying throughout the game. I did say these were small tweaks, and honestly, I think most players experience Bethesda games in first person, but for those of us who just simply like to look at our character and observe them and see all the cool gear that we've equipped, it would be nice to have that option available without needing to wait for a mod that will essentially fix that problem at some point. Number 2, I actually brought up during my in-depth gameplay analysis, and that was the XP and other elements, for that matter, appearing smack in the middle of the screen while you're playing. It was irritating, it was distracting, and quite frankly, completely unnecessary in my opinion to have it there. Especially the XP. You're in the middle of a firefight and you're getting these blurbs that are popping up in front of you saying plus 5 XP, plus 5 XP every time you kill an enemy. We don't need that, and quite frankly, there's no reason why these types of features shouldn't be customizable in the options menu. There's no reason why Bethesda can't provide that functionality to players. A similar thing happened with the locations. When you discover new locations, your entire field of view is obscured by the discovery of the Crete Research Laboratory, and I hope that Bethesda, at the very least, provides the option for players to customize how these pop-ups and messages appear during the release of the game. This functionality has been available in games for generations, and there's no reason why we can't do it here. If I want it in the middle, on the bottom, on the top right, left, just let me choose where I want to put that without having to install mods, and that's key here. Generally speaking, I think most people were very positively receptive to the gameplay reveal of Starfield, which is excellent. I'm incredibly excited for Starfield, and it makes me more excited to know that a lot of others are excited for this game. But there's one element in particular from the gameplay showcase a lot of people did respond to, which was the smoke and fog effects that were shown off during the gameplay demo. Now, specifically the one shot with the ship landing on the planet, if you look at it passively, it's really not that bad, all things considered, but when you stop and you actually take a look at it, there's definitively some room for improvement. It looks a bit choppy, it doesn't look that great, it almost is as though it's skipping frames for some reason, so there's definitely room to improve the smoke effects in Starfield, especially for these really cinematic moments when the ship is landing down on these planets. It should be very powerful, it should be a little bit epic, feeling you're landing in uncharted space, and you want that to look as cool as it feels. Again, it does cycle back to this attention to detail does matter. Admittedly, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I don't think, visually speaking, it's the greatest either, and I do believe that the common consensus is that Starfield simply doesn't look like a next-generation game, which is fine for a lot of folks. It's mostly about the gameplay for most of us, myself included, but I don't think that's a good argument for why Bethesda should kind of slack or be like, it's alright, fine, we don't really have to worry about that too much, we have some great gameplay and it's a really good RPG. It does tie back to how much Bethesda was hyping up this Creation Engine 2.0, right? These next generation improvements. A lot of people, and reasonably so, understandably so, equate that to visuals. Moral of the story is improve the fog, right? I guess is what I'm trying to say. I'm really going off on a tangent here. You guys need to stop me. One thing that I found really interesting about Starfield is the way that it's going back to the zoomed in cameras when you talk to NPCs. Because Elder Scrolls is one of my favorite franchises of all time, I remember distinctly that Bethesda, between Oblivion to Skyrim, they moved away from that because that's the direction that fans wanted to go in. So I found it really kind of peculiar. I'm not complaining, but I found it really interesting that it went back to that old style. I guess time leads to nostalgia inevitably, and people are looking for a little bit of that in their next game, especially after Fallout 76. But this one actually came from a comment from user Zarcaster, who mentioned, add an option to disable the dialogue camera. I'm not a fan of the Oblivion style of dialogue camera, so I hope it's an option, just like they did with Fallout 4. And admittedly, I'm hoping the same thing. To be honest, I preferred the Skyrim system of dialogue above the Oblivion system. I don't mind being locked in because it really centers you on that one character that you're talking to, and it's fine visually speaking. But again, this is one of those things where there's really no reason why Bethesda shouldn't provide the option for both. I did really enjoy that time continued moving around you when you talk to an NPC in Skyrim. Is it going to be the same thing here, or is it now just going to freeze time the same way it did in Oblivion, which is honestly how I see it going. Being able to switch between kind of that zoomed out view or that zoomed in really up close and personal camera angle. Be like GameStop, give the power to the players. Well, don't be like GameStop because GameStop's going out of business, but still take their slogan and be like GameStop's slogan. Give the power to the players, let us choose. All right, what are we up to? Number 3, 4, 5, I don't know. The next one. I don't know how long this list is going to be. The next one, which is recoil. It's the recoil in the weapons. Admittedly, during the gameplay reveal, I think a lot of folks were underwhelmed by the gunplay. Now, part of that is because it looks almost identical to Fallout 4, which isn't inherently a bad thing. But when I say identical, I mean, you look at the grenade animation, for example, and even the sound that plays, I think was taken right from Fallout 4. It's not the worst thing in the world because, honestly, I've been playing Fallout 4 recently. I've gotten back into the game with some mods, and I don't think the gunplay in Fallout 4 is really so bad that it needs these massive, extensive reworks. I think it's actually pretty good, but I would like to see a little bit more heft, a little bit more recoil, a little bit more punch to some of these weapons, especially the shotgun that they end up firing. Now, maybe futuristic weapons are so advanced in the time that Starfield takes place that recoil's basically non-existent. And if you want to use that as your excuse, fine. but I will tell you that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get very satisfying gunplay, even if it is realistic for the future. The rifle rounds coming out of the shotgun, I guess you could kind of put in the same boat as well in this category of gunplay, but maybe this is one of those things I will say where you need to actually get your hands on the game to truly experience how it feels. But if there's room to tweak it, continue to make it better, especially because of the delay, I hope that we do get that. Speaking of combat, feedback when the player gets damaged, a more indication when the player is taking damage. If you look at it during the gameplay demo, you see the health bar going down, but it's hard to tell when they're actually getting hit. Now, it's possible that some of these HUD effects were turned down for the sake of the gameplay demo. That's a very common practice when you're showing off a brand new game, so that's understandable. But there was no hit indication marker, there was no blood showing up on the screen. I don't even really know if I noticed kind of a screen blur when the player took damage. The players rely on that feedback when you're taking damage to know, do I continue pushing? Do I need to step back and take cover? How do I respond to the situation? Some players might argue, well, it's not really realistic if blood's getting all in your face when you're getting shot and you're wearing this big hefty spacesuit, and that's perfectly fine and logical, and I understand it. But again, it's about giving the players some good visual feedback about the condition of their character, because I'm not getting shot in real life. I don't feel a bullet wound going into my leg, so I need to see what's happening on top of whatever vibration I might feel in the controller. Another comment that I wanted to bring up, because honestly you guys just have really great ideas a lot of the time, and I wanted to highlight this one. It's coming from subscriber CJ, and he mentioned that I was playing Oblivion again, and in it had way more stores. One is a shield store, another in a jewelry store. I hope Starfield has this instead of just the general store, armor, and weapon. Also, the Oblivion inns in the game had a ton, and they were all so unique, and I hope Starfield has this also. Admittedly, this is one of my top suggestions that I have today, just because Oblivion, it made sense, especially in the scale of the Imperial City, but even in the smaller cities, you still had 2 inns in Bruma to go explore. You had the more expensive inn and the cheaper inn in Skingrad, I believe, as well, and this added some believability to a lot of the cities. In Starfield, we haven't seen the innermost parts of the city exactly, so we don't exactly know how it's going to be laid out and where the different districts will be, that sort of thing. But they are massively expanded than anything we've seen in a Bethesda game before, and that means that absolutely you should be having these diverse different locations, and certain merchants will offer you certain prices, a different quality of goods at different areas of the city, and that sort of thing. And I do want to see that reflected here. And the last one is another small tweak that I'm hoping to see, but that is the shadows in the lighting, in particular in space. It wasn't really an issue on the ground, which I thought was interesting. Maybe it was just the time of day that they were showing off, but I did notice in space you had some lighting pop in that was occurring on some space stations, and the light just kind of gradually faded. Maybe you can argue there was a meteor that was, or an asteroid that was coming by and blocking some of the sunlight, but it really did look like an issue just with the lighting and the draw distances. And if that is the case, I hope that Bethesda can expand it, at least in space, because realistically there's not too much going on up there. It's pretty empty most of the time. So that's all for me. Again, we wanted to keep it small because we don't know where Bethesda's priorities exactly are. They might be on much larger things. And I hope that you are enjoying these discussions. There's not really much coming officially from Bethesda, but I like talking about the game. I hope that you guys enjoy listening and hearing about the game. So I'm going to keep doing as many of these that I can think of. So thank you guys for watching. I appreciate the support as always, and I hope to see you all next time. So long, everybody.